This retreat, I think the theme that summarizes what I've been thinking about, I've been calling bass-ackwards. I started the retreat with this, and it's really just seeing how everything that I think and believe is completely the opposite from reality. And again and again and again, I keep seeing this, which I guess is seeing the depths of the ignorance, which is the first step in developing some wisdom. So I guess that's a good thing, but it's also quite humbling in seeing how completely opposite pretty much everything that I think is. I mean, looking at the body, I think that I'm my body, but really it's just a bunch of parts and pieces and water and dirt and air. I think I'm my feelings, but they're really so fleeting and really contradictory a lot of times. I think I'm my mind, but really when I look for it, there's no reference point. There's nothing to absolutely pinpoint on. It's like trying to identify with a cloud, that it's always changing and shifting and moving. I also think that I'm permanent and take everything personal, but everything is impermanent and nothing is personal. But I make it. I deeply want things to be simple, pleasant, and stable. They're not. And I see people as threats and enemies when really they're my kind friends and just like me. One of these bass-ackwards things I've been looking at is control, of how I think I'm in control, but I'm really totally not. And so I'm not in control of my body. I have very little choice I have a little bit of choice of what to eat, very little choice here, but little choice of what to eat, drink, and sleep. And besides that, my heart that keeps me alive is pumping without my choice. My lungs, everything else in my body is doing it without my choice or control. I have no control over my feelings, obviously, a lot of times. And even though I think I should, but if I could, then I would be happy all the time, which isn't how it is. And I'm definitely not in control, at this point in time, I'm not in control of my mind, especially in meditation. We can all see that. I can have an intention to stay on one focused topic, and then 30 seconds later, I'm planning on how to sew a namjar. So, and I'm also not in control of others. I've really seen this retreat of my opinion factory, I call it, of how it pops up constantly, of thinking that I'm right and I know how things should be done. It's been humbling of seeing that. And so I've been playing with that, of just being like, asking it like, really? Do I really know how to do absolutely everything right? And who made me the center of the universe? So it's been good just challenging that. But when I act controlling, I'm seeing things as inherently existent. I'm seeing things from a very narrow view, fixed and absolute, a very black and white view as solid and separate objects that can be controlled, manipulated, and tweaked just according to my views and opinions. The opposite of control is feeling helpless. And then especially I can see how I slip into that when I look at how things really are, not stable, simple, or pleasant. That brings up a feeling of helplessness, which feels miserable. And so I delude myself with finding ways to feel stable and control, which also doesn't work. So I flip between those two extremes. Fortunately, the middle way between these is the reality of influence. And that's the dependent arising of a so much wider spectrum of options and diversity, which is much more powerful and far-reaching. It's interesting in looking at the definition between control and influence, both of them have an element of power in them, but control has kind of a more, almighty, omnipotent feel to it, and it has an element of authority, command, and dominance. Whereas influence also has power and control, but a much stronger emphasis on effect, and is more in alignment with the reality of cause and effect. I tend to think of control as being more powerful, but influence actually has a much farther reaching impact, and it's often not recognized or seen as directly or as obvious. But in my retreat, during retreat, I can see how influenced I am by everything. Just like a sponge, or I call it the permeable membrane. Just, I'm not this separate solid thing, but completely influenced by what people say, how I'm thinking, what I'm reading, what I'm seeing. I can see that when I go onto the meditation cushion, how my mind has been influenced and impacted by those things previously that I ran into. And so one thing I've been thinking about and seeing how I don't have control about anything, holding that with the Buddha's mantra of Tayata Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Soha, control, control, I can control my mind. and I can't control my mind right now, but that's the beauty of you can control your mind when you have the wisdom of cause and effect and the true nature of reality. We can only really control things when we understand what we're controlling, which is that we have that influence of things and how there's so many different causes and effects and conditions that play into things. The mind is the only thing that I can control, but at this point in time, it feels so wild and uncontrollable, so instead I try to control everything else, which is impossible and futile. But that's, again, how I try the futile strategy that doesn't really work. Yesterday I was thinking about this and I thought, but even the Buddhas aren't in control, so why do I think I should be? But the Buddhas do have influence, and that's what matters. When Venerable was teaching on Shantideva's chapter 8, verse 101, she said that Shantideva said, there is no real owner of suffering. Therefore, who has control over it? So in reflecting on this, if there's no real owner and there's no real control, then there's also no one to really blame, and no one that has 100% complete responsibility. Again, it's so many different causes and conditions and influences that play into things. And in looking at this, it helps me to see things as not permanent and personal. The other day, I came across a haiku poem that speaks to this so beautifully and really summarizes kind of the retreat. It's by Kobayashi Isa, a haiku poet who was an 18th century Shinto Buddhist priest. And he said, "This world of dew is only a world of dew. And yet, and yet." And to me, this captures so much of how everything is impermanent and insubstantial, not big and as solid as they think it is. And yet, each dewdrop matters. Each thought and action matters. It has an influence much bigger than I can imagine. I was playing with this haiku poem because I like to tweak things. And so for our reality is this world of snow and mud is only a world of snow and mud. And yet, the snow will melt. It'll melt into our water system, into the well. We'll drink it. It'll become my body. The mud represents my confusion, afflictions, harmful habits, but they can be transformed so that I can have greater understanding in helping others. So the power of these words, and yet, is this paradox of the fact that I am impermanent, just a drop of dew, but that my thoughts and actions matter, that the power of my intention matters. And it's holding this intention to understand reality and see that we are all connected and influence each other so much more than we realize is really so much bigger than I can possibly imagine. But it's inspiring to think about. And yet.